We're on the cusp of 3.0, putting on our biker gear and riding straight into Laha Roy. But before we depart on this new adventure that takes us deep underground into this academy and research facility, I wanted this video to act as some sort of reflection on everything we as a community have gone through the last year, and how Wuthering Waves as a game has changed. I guess you could say this video serves as a metaphorical pause, a space to breathe before we plunge ourselves into a new adventure and soak up everything Kuro is going to offer us. It wasn't always plain and easy sailing for Wuthering Waves. The 1.x patches came to a mixed reception, and while 1.1 started to show signs of the good that was to come, 1.2 stopped any momentum the game had in its tracks. People simply stopped playing for a time. While a free character in Shangli Yao was enticing, especially one that at the time was meta-defining in his gameplay, many didn't seem to care or invest a lot of their own efforts into a story or narrative that they didn't know would be consistent or not. People weren't angry per se, they were just not logging in, waiting. I think it's important to take a minute and understand why so many had high expectations for Wuthering Waves. Ever since the beginning, people were comparing the game to Genshin Impact, understandably so. After all, it was competing for the exact same market space. Many saw it as the game that would bring solutions to Genshin's problems that the Hoyoverse devs seemingly didn't want to fix or address at that time. Many players had grown fatigued at the lack of endgame content, and Wuthering Waves was appealing to that exact disgruntled player base by introducing a free-to-play game that offered a more complex combat system, higher user skill ceilings, an evolving endgame theme, updated visuals, and a darker, richer tone to their narrative. This way, Wuthering Waves would appeal to both current Genshin players, the disgruntled ones who quit, and offered a new entry point at the beginning of a game's life cycle for new players to be intrigued and hop in early. So naturally, people had high expectations, and it's safe to say we all remember the launch was anything but smooth. Multiple controversies, lots of compensation, and a 1.x questline that felt obviously spliced, chopped together, and rough around the edges. It couldn't be more obvious that even to this day, we still don't have any meaningful screen time with Kalkaro, Danjin, Tauchi, or Wanwu. It was rough. A game that had so much riding on it was now an easy target and easy pickings for the doubters to critique and throw shade over. The so-called Genshin killer wasn't killing anything. In fact, it was struggling to stay alive itself for the first few weeks. It was so bad that Wuthering Waves didn't even have dedicated version live streams again until 1.3, a whole 4 months after its release. To many, it showed a lack of confidence in the developers that even they didn't want to talk about these versions. It was up to the community to fight for itself, almost fight for its right to exist, and prove why it deserved to be one of the top gachas. Is there any wonder why there were some creators at the time that were seen as vigilantes for the game? The community had to speak up to sing the praises for the game because not even the devs wanted to talk about their updates directly. So the community were drawn to those that did, because they wanted a safe place and reassurance about a game they'd grown attached to and could see the potential of. When the developers get quiet, communities only get louder. But to many's delight, the devs weren't hiding or had given up. They were just preparing behind the scenes to make the next phase of the game hit twice as hard, starting with 1.3. And that's why so many people were excited for this 2.0 reveal, because it meant more than just an update for those that have been around since the start. It literally represented a fresh start where the game could try again, and Kuro could tell the story they always wanted to, in the way that felt best to them. It was a game that really needed decisive proof that the devs were serious and here to stay, and 1.3 was the beginning of that turning point. For many, this was the first time a Wuthering Waves quest had them locked in so hard with a character that had deep ties to not only Rover, but entire history of Solaris 3. It was their attempt to recapture an audience that already grew tired after the slog and snooze fest that was 1.2, but after a lack of main story progression in 1.4, don't get me wrong, Camellia was a welcomed addition, but the fans once again fell into a slumber, waiting, hoping that 2.0 would once again bear fruits that they could sink their teeth into if they could indeed match the atmosphere they got a taste of in the Black Shores. And what do people love about 1.3? Characters having deep ties to Rover that also add to the world building, storytelling that starts showing more than telling that appeals to the emotions of players. That was now the expectation players had for 2.0. So when the time came for Kuro to start their drip marketing for Rinascita, it was treated as some sort of DEFCON level 1 response. Every hour they dropped teasers for the upcoming characters. They were items in their possession that were character defining, and I remember being at ground zero, scrambling to piece together any sense of what it all means in order to make a video. Every single Wuthering Waves content creator that I knew were acting the same way a Taylor Swift fan would if Taylor dropped an impromptu surprise album. Pandemonium, excitement, hype, everyone could sense the energy, and it was all positively buzzing. They had only dropped teasers for characters and people were this excited. Twitter was on fire with talk, videos were getting uploaded left, right and center. It was around this time I think everybody knew that Kuro Games had amassed a cult-like following for this game, one that had been so eager and hopeful for a new beginning. And then, November 24th, the first 5-star characters for Rinascita got dropped. Millions of views, thousands of likes. It was a feeding frenzy for the fans, acting like a starved animal that was rabid for any crumb of update or news. The wait for 2.0 would feel like a journey, though I think to many a pilgrimage would be more apt in this instance, as many saw 2.0 to be the shining beacon of hope that would be their savior and give meaning to a game they had come to cherish and hoped would deliver on. After all, the developers were putting all of their eggs into this basket. They had to. Wuthering Waves begins to kick their hype into overdrive. November 24th and 25th, the first drip marketing for the characters to be released in 2.0 was revealed to be Carlotta and Rosia. The art for this drip was nothing short of mesmerizing. The amount of detail that went into these pieces left everyone pretty speechless, and it was a clear step up from all the drip that the 1 characters had received. This was another look into just how much attention and care was going into making sure that every piece of public-facing media that gets released for this game does so with the goal of turning heads. One that not only makes you go, oh wow, okay, but it forces you to reframe how you view the entire game. A brand repositioning so strong that even people who may have been disgruntled and quit would second guess their decision and be convinced enough to give Wuthering Waves a second try. This showed to everyone that the team behind this game was serious now, and in it for the long haul. That was made ever so more clear when they dropped their trailer. December 21st, Wuthering Waves officially dropped their 2.0 trailer, All Silent Souls Can Sing. This trailer was a huge tonal shift from what people had come to expect. It was light-hearted, upbeat, full of energy and excitement. It was literally a trailer that was introducing us to the Carnival of Rinascita. If this had been released for 1.0, people would think this is an entirely different game. The tonal shift was just that big. Wuthering Waves was heading for a fantasy-style aesthetic, along with old-school European architecture and character clothing, all with heavy Italian influences. But despite this shift, the reception to the trailer was peak cinema. There was a clear care in the quality that was being delivered that people for the most part didn't mind the tonal change. Naturally though, there were some that did question it. These were people that had come to understand and believe that Wuthering Waves was supposed to be the open world version of PGR, and it's aesthetic, and it's totally reasonable for those individuals to have these expectations. Which makes it even more impressive that the developers were so strong in their vision that they knowingly ran with this narrative gamble. The fact that it paid off and had everyone stunned and excited for what was to come was the biggest win they could achieve. Wuthering Waves had finally been accepted, and the patch wasn't even out yet. Then 2.0 dropped, and that's when everything changed. Did the game meet expectations? Was this all just an elaborate hype plan to mask a half-baked product? That couldn't be further from reality. Before I continue, I want to make something pretty clear. This video is not meant to be a story retrospective. I'm not going to go through every single patch and give you a breakdown on the narrative and what was good or bad. I'm not blind to the fact that Wuthering Waves is by no means a perfect story. It has immense flaws in its story writing, despite the fact it's still a compelling piece of media to many. Maybe it's something I'll address in a future video, but for now, I'm here just to talk about the changes in presentation and reception that 2.0 brought this year. Act 1 was an introduction that slowly introduced us to a whole host of characters that we'd get to know and love during our time in Rinascita. The pacing was modest. It made sure to ease you into the vastly different shift of tone and story delivery that would come to be something synonymous with Wuthering Waves later on. Our interactions with the Troop of Fools, Cristoforo, and the Order immediately had us asking and pondering many questions just half an hour into the story. It wasted no time in trying to grab your attention. But to me, it took 90 minutes before we get into the real introduction. There's an elevator scene which I can only assume was something that was taken inspiration from BioShock Infinite. Ascension literally brings you closer to God. It bridges heaven and earth. It's something that you have to be graced with and not something that can be forced or self-imposed. While in BioShock's case, Booker's forced ascension to Columbia was rooted in facade and sin, a lesson in how trying to ascend without grace leads to ruin. However, Rover's ascension was seemingly granted with no ill repercussions. He is, after all, portrayed as a godlike figure anyway, one that's blessed by the region's sentinels, the people's equivalent to gods, and he has a higher authority over them as it is. I thought this was a truly awesome parallel, not only for its implication, but the fact it led to such a stunning scene that most of us who played this patch will remember for the entire length of the game's history. It became a core memory for many. This to me was the true moment when I realized Wuthering Waves had itself ascended. It recognized its flaws and improved upon itself. It became self-aware of its own elevation. I thought it was quite poetic. The way dialogue was shot meant that it felt more cinematic and engaging. Rover seemed to speak more, the expressions of all the characters matched how they actually seemed to feel. It was a welcomed huge step up from what we had previously been accustomed to, and seemed to carry the expectations that 1.3 had left the community. It was a success. The story was met with boundless praise. Not only was the story engaging, the attention to detail and the expansive map design, along with the addition of flight, made exploration an absolute joy to experience. Adding flight is no easy task. It has to firstly feel good, which Kuro nailed out the gate. The momentum mechanics worked flawlessly. Secondly, now that you can cover large expanses of area in all directions, the developers had a mammoth task to design a large enough map that isn't just simply wide, but has great amounts of verticality to it. They exponentially increased their workload to an insane degree to offer an open world experience that ended up being enjoyable to participate in. Every area was beautiful in all directions. 1.0 truly paled in comparison. To top it off, Wuthering Waves also officially released a new endgame mode in 2.1, Whimpering Wastes. Now, it definitely didn't start out on the best foot, and it continues to be a game mode that needs the most tweaking and receives the most critique. But it showed Kuro's commitment to developing more endgame content for its players. Again, one of the main reasons the community supported the game in the first first place, because the developers were listening to what the players wanted and not fall trap to its actions of its predecessors and releasing a new mode once every 4 years. It's not very often that a game is able to live up to expectations so high, but this was one of the rare occasions where it mattered and the community response was overwhelming. 2.2 is probably the highest peak Wuthering Waves received, largely regarded as one of the best patches they ever made. It had people literally crying in tears, so overwhelmed at what Kuro had just delivered them in narrative. It was a moment of collective praise, and everyone came together to share their joy in what they had just experienced. Again, was it a flawless, perfect delivery of a story? No, it's not the best piece of media ever made, but people were happy and content that the developers cared enough to improve their quality. The amount of excitement around all of Cartathea's cinematics was breathtaking. People cared so much about this story. The community felt as though they could take a sigh of relief as the seeds of their labor for the past 6 months, shouting the game's praise when the developers wouldn't, finally bore fruit they could now enjoy, and show everyone that this is why it mattered. It made the reward even sweeter. 2.2 was celebrated, and rightfully so. The game had finally proven everything it needed to, and solidified itself why it deserved to be amongst others in the rankings of gacha games. 2.2 had become a reference point in how to masterfully craft a redemption story and win back its audience and more. But reaching such a peak comes with a cost. Meeting expectations going forward was going to be an uphill battle. Every patch that follows cannot be judged by its own merits, but instead will be constantly compared to the merits that came before it. The phrase "you're only as good as your last race" comes to mind here. The peak becomes the status quo, and everything would be judged under its shadow. That's not the fault of the developers or community, it's just a natural progression of expectations. You let a whole community experience a high for months, from 2.0 to 2.2, taking them off the ride is only going to be met with resistance. And that's when 2.3 happened, the anniversary. This was the first time in months that Kuro had received any amount of resounding critique over their patches. The brakes were essentially slammed on any progression of narrative that people had just experienced a peak for. It was the most intense cliffhanger you could get. The pace had been slowed right down to 0 to give time to celebrate the first anniversary of the game. For some people, this was their time to take a break from the game. They already experienced their peak, and had spent enough time amongst the joys Wuthering Waves had to offer in 2.0. They were happy and fulfilled enough. Some continued to play casually, enjoying the celebration. This was especially true for many Eastern players. To them, the anniversary felt like a necessary breather, a way to take time and collect thoughts. Others thought the rewards were a warning sign that maybe, for the first time in a while, the developers weren't listening enough. It started to sow doubt in the minds of some players. Was their praise of the game now being used as a shield for the developers to give less than fair rewards for an anniversary? It wasn't in Kuro's legacy to fall behind on things like this, and to many, this was noted as something to be cautious about moving forward. For the first time, Kuro had given a reason for people to be skeptical. Now, I'm not here to be the judge on whether or not the rewards are objectively bad or good. I'm here to simply address the reality of sentiment around it, and perception, after all, becomes reality. So, now sown with doubt and a break from the narrative high, Kuro was placed on the back foot again for the first time in a while. Momentum is so fragile. Once you lose it, it's hard to rebuild again. Cartathea had such a legendary run in building that up for her story in 2.2, from extra cinematics to exclusive official leak reveals. But now, as people wait for 2.4, all hopes were pinned on just a livestream from the developers. But 2.4 was met with an abundance of praise. Septimont looked breathtaking, and there was clear immense attention to detail to the environments. There were also a huge amount of events and QOL changes that were very welcomed and wanted in the community. But I think it's important to note that it did feel like a narrative reset. New area, new characters, and new goals. While yes, they are all intrinsically linked together in some way, this was essentially a new arc they were building up, and it's so understandable why everyone didn't immediately jump onto it or the story, because it was such a departure from 2.2, its themes, and even its characters. Outside of Cartothea, players really had very little reason to feel immediately attached to this new cast. Emotional investment would take time, effort, and patience, which was not something everyone was willing to commit to again so soon after 2.2. But Septimont was still wildly successful. People did care, the engagement just didn't disappear or people started hating the game, it just thinned out a little bit. In this moment is where Wuthering Waves' weakness in storytelling started to become visible. If it was able to include its cast the people had already cared about into the Septimont story arc, people would feel more of a reason to care. For many patches, it just kind of felt like the original Rinascita cast had been discarded in favor of this new arc that hadn't yet earned its emotional weight yet with this audience. 2.5 though was a conversational peak. It was Filova's quest, a character that's been present since day one in the story. It's natural that people would be interested in it, and it truly was one of the most polarizing when it came to community sentiment, and honestly, that's a sign of a well-written character to me. There's so much to be discussed about her that people were having debates, conflicts, and going crazy over her. It was a story that again made some people cry and clearly left a huge emotional weight on the people because they had spent the time to invest in her story for over a year. But that excitement masked other issues that were beginning to surface. A lack of meaningful combat-focused events left portions of the player base with little to engage with. For many, 2.5 felt like another transitional patch that was long and dependent on interest in the story arc they might not have fully bought into. And when momentum is already fragile, long stretches without engagement make it easier for people to drift away. And that's what happened over the course of 2.6 and 2.7. Again, I'm not here to do a story retrospective. Version 2.6 in particular received a mixed reception. While characters like Augusta and Yuna were compelling, some of the broader world-building concepts that were introduced felt underexplained. There were new ideas like the chaos that were introduced without the space to fully explore them, leaving parts of the narrative feeling vague rather than mysterious. The same goes for Yuna's forte and the significance of it in the story. Most people wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how it worked and how it changed. This may have been a side effect of companion stories being folded into the main quest. There's less time for exposition, less thinking time for the audience, and there's no room for the ideas to breathe. Once again, characters players were connected with, like Lupa, felt underutilized despite their significance in the whole story of Septimont. It really did make it feel like there was just a time restraint on the story, and that's why they couldn't fit her in, because they easily could be space for her. For some, it began to feel like the narrative pendulum has swung too far, prioritizing character moments at the expense of deeper world building. Whether that shift was intentional is an open question for everyone to discuss. So now we have more people bringing up doubts about the narrative, and again paired up with QOL changes like Nightmare Nests that were poorly received by long-time players, along again with a lack of combat events that made up large portions of the soul of the game. And there is any wonder that by the time 2.7 rolled around, there was a lot more silence than you'd expect for a conclusion of a story. No, really, why was the ending of Rinascita not widely discussed like 2.2 or 2.5? This was the ending of the entire arc, and people simply enjoyed it who stuck around and quietly moved on. It didn't even come close to the insane talk that 2.2 managed to produce so clearly. It had lost a chunk of its players along the way. When Rinascita finally reached its conclusion, the response was subdued. Those who stayed enjoyed it, then they moved on. And now we're left a day away from 3.0, and the hype or intrigue isn't nearly as high as it was for 2.0. So what happened? Where did everyone go? Why did people suddenly lose interest? I think people needed more of a breather in order to get excited again. To be consistently overstimulated means it's harder to enjoy what's coming next to the same degree. It felt like no time has passed between 2.7 and getting major 3.0 teasers. But between 1.4 and 2.0, it truly felt like a downtime where people could collect their thoughts and hype in anticipation for what's to come. Kuro needed 2.0 to be great. It needed 2.0 to be its savior. Now, heading into 3.0, that urgency is gone. Wuthering Waves isn't at risk anymore. It doesn't need a savior. It already proved itself, both to the creators and to its community. There's a reason the game won Player's Voice at the Game Awards. It was a year-long vindication of people saying that Wuwa would never be good and it wouldn't make it, and 2.0 proved them all wrong. But success changes the rules of the game. What was once something that felt extraordinary and revolutionary in 2.0 just becomes 3.0's expectation. Over time, people will take what Wuthering Waves did for granted, its achievements and sentiments. So if 3.0 comes around and falls short, it's not for a lack of care, but rather they raised the bar so high on their own game. Wuthering Waves has now created a paradox for itself. 3.0 isn't here as a lifeline, but it instead arrives from the position to be aptly scrutinized. But knowing the difference in contexts, that's a mighty hard battle for Wuthering Waves to win. I hope you'll enjoy 3.0, and thank you very much. I actually really enjoy scripting and making long-form content. I've just thought it was always too much of a risk sometimes to spend so much time on a piece of media and not have it really do anything. But I have some downtime and I thought, you know what, I'm feeling motivated to do it. And I will probably put more long-form content on my new second channel, I guess third or fourth channel at this point, where I'll be doing longer-form commentary on the gaming space in general. So subscribe if you're interested in that. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, all that good stuff. I'll see you all in 3.0. Peace.
Twitch.tv/Captain Cabinetz, Captain Cabinetz.